There is a story about Aristotle that most philosophy professors won't tell you. When the great thinker was tutoring young Alexander, he didn't begin with ethics or rhetoric. He began by making the future conqueror of the known world do something absurd: carry a cup of water across the training yard without spilling a drop. When Alexander complained, Aristotle is said to have backhanded the cup into the dirt. Again, he commanded. This went on for days. The lesson wasn't about water, it was about the invisible infrastructure of mastery. Every world-shaping achievement, from the Parthenon to the Apollo program, was built on 7 daily habits so fundamental they've become invisible to modern eyes. We live in an age of unprecedented comfort and unprecedented mediocrity. The average person now checks their phone before their feet hit the floor in the morning, consumes more information before breakfast than a medieval scholar did in a month, and yet feels more paralyzed than ever. This isn't an accident. It's the inevitable result of having abandoned the daily rituals that once turned boys into kings and philosophers into legends. The ancients didn't have better genetics or secret knowledge. They simply understood what neuroscience now confirms. Greatness is a circadian rhythm, a biological pulse that must be maintained daily or lost forever. The first habit is what the Stoics called the morning interrogation. Before dawn's first light ever touched the Aegean, Aristotle's students would rise and perform a ruthless self-audit, not with journals or apps, but by standing with no cloths on before a polished bronze mirror and speaking aloud their weaknesses. This wasn't self-help, it was tactical reconnaissance on one's own soul. Modern studies show this practice lights up the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex like a war room, creating what neuroscientists call threat awareness without cortisol. Translation: you become impossible to surprise, especially by yourself. The second habit flies in the face of every productivity guru. Aristotle mandated what he called strategic loitering, deliberate periods of wandering the Lyceum's gardens with no destination. We now know these apparently aimless walks trigger the brain's default mode network, sparking insights no focused thinking could produce. Da Vinci stole this habit, as did Darwin, and it's why their notebooks overflow with ideas that seem to have arrived fully formed. The modern equivalent isn't meditation apps. It's learning to be bored productively, to let the mind hunt without a leash. Physical discipline formed the third pillar, but not as we understand it today. Aristotle's students didn't lift weights or count macros. They trained for what he called functional nobility, the ability to perform one perfect pull-up in full battle armor, to swim across the Hellespont while debating metaphysics, to fast for 3 days without mental fog. This wasn't about fitness. It was about proving the body would obey the mind's most unreasonable demands. Modern research on elite performers reveals an uncomfortable truth. The single best predictor of sustained success isn't IQ or education, but grip, strength, endurance. The ancients knew this instinctively. The fourth habit will infuriate the productivity cult. Aristotle demanded his students practice what he called controlled incompetence, deliberately bungling a task they'd mastered, then analyzing why. Modern psychology calls this desirable difficulty, and it's the only known way to prevent expertise from becoming a prison. The Spartans institutionalized this by forcing veteran warriors to fight left-handed. Silicon Valley unknowingly mimics it with failure postmortems. The principle remains unchanged. Mastery requires regularly stepping off your own pedestal. Evening brought the fifth habit, what Athenian generals called the twilight reckoning. As torches were lit, Aristotle's students would gather not to review successes, but to dissect what they had avoided that day. This wasn't negative thinking. It was strategic excavation of cowardice in its subtlest forms, the difficult conversation postponed, the necessary risk deferred, the truth left unspoken. fMRI studies now show this practice creates unique neural pathways between the amygdala and prefrontal cortex, literally rewiring fear into foresight. The sixth habit explains why Aristotle's students could recall entire texts verbatim after one reading. They practiced what medieval monks would later call memory palace gardening, associating every new concept with a physical location in the Lyceum, then mentally walking those paths at dusk. Modern memory champions still use this technique to memorize decks of cards in minutes, but the ancients understood its real power. It forces knowledge to become spatial, turning abstract ideas into landscapes you can literally navigate. The final habit is the most counterintuitive. Aristotle mandated what he termed strategic forgetting, deliberately erasing minor skills to make room for greater ones. Modern research on neuroplasticity confirms the brutal math of genius. Every neural pathway maintained comes at the opportunity cost of another. The Spartans institutionalized this by making warriors abandon non-combat skills. Da Vinci practiced it by periodically ceasing to paint. The lesson is merciless. Sometimes you must lose competence to gain mastery. These 7 habits formed an unbroken chain, each reinforcing the others in what Aristotle called the circle of arete. They explain how a single teacher produced history's greatest conqueror, its most influential philosopher, and half a dozen rulers who reshaped civilizations. The good news is the habits require no special tools, no expensive courses, just the willingness to treat each day as a forge rather than a checklist. The bad news is they work precisely because they're difficult, because they weed out those who want success more than they want transformation. The final lesson from those scrolls is the hardest. Aristotle warned his students that practicing these habits for a day would make them feel foolish. A month would make them feel alienated. A year would make them dangerous. 2,000 years haven't changed that equation. The water cup still waits. The dawn mirror still demands. The only question is whether you'll spill your first attempt or, like Alexander, keep carrying it until the world kneels. Here is the hard truth Aristotle himself would tell you if he stood in your shoes at this very moment. Knowledge untested is knowledge wasted. You now hold 7 ancient levers capable of moving the world, but they will rust in your hands if left unused. This is not a passive revelation, it is a gauntlet thrown. Starting tomorrow, you will enact one habit, just one. Not the easiest, but the one that twists in your gut like a Spartan spear when you consider it. You will perform it with the precision of a philosopher and the relentlessness of a Macedonian phalanx. And when you complete it, when you've faced that dawn interrogation, or that brutal moment of controlled incompetence, or that twilight reckoning that scrapes your soul raw, you will return here and etch your victory in the comments with 2 words: challenge accepted. Why? Because history remembers only those who act. Alexander didn't conquer Persia by admiring Aristotle's teachings. He conquered by applying them with inhuman discipline. The scrolls you've inherited today are not museum pieces. They are live ammunition. The sun rises in 6 hours. The mirror waits. The water cup trembles at the edge of the table. What happens next is between you and the ghost of every great man who ever stared down his own reflection and chose to become more. Challenge accepted. Prove it.